If you're calling it cultural day and the only thing there is food, it leads children to think that the only differences that cultures have and that we should appreciate is the food. I think the context of the broader conversation matters more than anything, but also how is it being executed? Who is represented and by who? Are you actually in touch with those communities to find out, is this authentic even representations of culture? Or did I get kente cloth off of Amazon and it ain't even real kente cloth? It can go wrong so easily. So that's my hesitation about it. This is Discourse with Daryl and Demetria, a continuation of our conversations on the Diversity Different podcast. Let's get on the record in one place some of the problems with allyship or how it goes wrong. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So the idea of performative allyship is highlighted nicely in a skit. And if we can put it in, that'd be wonderful. But the skit talks about how the statement for indigenous lands has become performative, that so many
Mhm.
groups want to do it because it's the thing to do, but they aren't supporting, amplifying the groups that they're supposedly being an ally to. So the performative aspect is one that not only fails to do any good for the group that you're supposedly being an ally for, it actually starts to harm them because it just
Mm,
becomes repetitive act. And just like any
yes.
act that's repeated over and over and over and over again,
Mhm.
it starts to lose its emphasis. It starts to lose its strength because it just becomes performative in nature.
The example you gave about the Native American land acknowledgement is perfect. And I think that there are other performative issues that come from that same spirit of whatever makes us do that. There are other things. So it's also the problem of only showing up when it's trending,
Yep.
only showing up when something happens, right? Like you're more likely to engage in that kind of performative allyship if it's not authentic. The other thing that comes with allyship when it's performative is the fatigue and jump ship phenomenon, or just the simple privilege of being able to step away when it becomes exhausting or no longer desirable or politically unattractive, while marginalized people don't get that choice.
Yep. I'm curious about your thoughts on school culture day, where they bring in all the different foods from the different cultures. Is that performative? What are your thoughts?
I think it's performative if it's not done in tandem with anything else. So I don't mind culture day or recognizing artifacts of cultures, but I also think, how is it being done matters. It can get offensive, if you
Yes.
reduce a group to their food, for example, and that's it. But if we are doing culture day and culture day is part of a broader discussion of these communities that are represented at Culture Day, then I don't have a problem with that. I think exposure is often a way to connect communities with two people. One way that we connect with cultures is through food. But if the only time you know anything about being Thai is just how they serve their spring rolls, then that's performative and nothing more. But if it's part of a broader discussion and broader type of exposure, then I think it can be good. So, like many things, the answer to for me is it depends. What do you think about Culture
Well,
Day?
I ask this because I'm very concerned about Culture Day. It worries me. When I see these newsletters that say, we're going to bring in everybody's food and it's going to be Culture Day, I am both,
Who's there?
yeah. And I'm appreciating that there is a step in a direction of sharing cultures in Culture Day. I'm
Mm,
worried, and I think you articulated it in a way that I hadn't framed yet, and this idea of it needs to be more, and maybe the more is what would make me feel less apprehensive about these culture days that's bring everybody's
mhm.
food. And I intentionally asked you because I know you have done a lot of work with school systems and you've been in deep with them and probably have had a better opportunity to really engage, interact, and think deeply about what those additional things would look like so that Food culture day isn't it, and that's all these kids walk away from. "Oh, your culture is spicy food and it's stinky. You must be stinky." Like, I don't want culture day to turn into that.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
really am intentionally asking you, like, what are those follow-ups? What do they need to do in
And culture
addition?
day can be beyond food too, right? Like, so I think it's even how you do culture day itself. If you're calling it cultural day and the only thing there is food, it leads children to think that the only differences that cultures have and that we should appreciate is the food. I think the context of the broader conversation matters more than anything, but also how is it being executed? Who is represented and by who? Are you actually in touch with those communities to find out is this authentic even representations of culture? Or did I get kente cloth off of Amazon and it ain't even real kente cloth? It can go wrong so easily. So that's my hesitation about it. You bring up like my work with school systems. I think, one of the hardest things when schools wanna do cultural recognition is convincing them that that representation for whatever it is that they wanna do, that it should be a part of the culture more generally. That's hard. Another issue that comes up with allyship is co-option, right? That allies sometimes unintentionally make movements about themselves or center themselves. Also, kind of embedded in that is doing it for praise and validation. They may not outwardly say that, but just kind of this co-option issue.
This idea of co-opting is often directly connected with resources, and
Absolutely.
resources are often connected to privilege, right? Those
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
often 2 steps in the same thing, and if I have the money, I have the gold, I get to make the rules. I have
Mhm.
the money, I get to say how this struggle is going to go forward because I've got the funds to finance the struggle, and so it's very easy to start co-opting when they more marginalized, and I intentionally said more marginalized because I'm not suggesting that the one that's co-opting
Sure.
isn't
Mhm.
marginalized as well. And this goes to the idea of the oppression Olympics, but we don't have time to get into that right now.
No,
So
that's not.
this idea of co-opting often has to be self-checked because the resources are there to co-opt and to
Mhm.
dominate.
Mhm.
And if you're not amplifying, there's probably a lack of allyship. So to the extent that somebody or someone or some organization is about to co-opt, perhaps the question is, are we amplifying or are we speaking over?
Another problem is the discomfort that allyship requires.
Mhm,
And I think that's one of the reasons why the co-opting and the paternalism happens because one, I think a lot of times those that serve as allies are used to being centered. And
mm,
so it's just kind of natural to be centered. And because it makes them uncomfortable when they're not and or they don't know how to operate in the discomfort that allyship often requires, right? So
yes,
being an ally doesn't necessarily mean being welcome with open arms into a movement all the time, especially if a community has faced some kind of harm from the identity group the ally belongs to.
mhm, mhm,
So
yes,
that if you really want to be an ally as a white person, for example, supporting Black Lives Matter, there are going to be some things that happens in those meetings, that happens in that work that will make you uncomfortable.
right.
And so we've talked about being comfort with the discomfort before, but if you are seeking to be an ally, that discomfort should be expected, but also let in and welcome because that means you're learning. That means that you're probably doing it right if you're uncomfortable. If you're comfortable in every meeting, then you probably ain't doing it right. Part of that discomfort is also checking the people in your identity group that have contrary views and actions to the group that you're serving as an ally for. So if I'm not checking my peers, my friends, my family who are harmful to the group I'm trying to be an ally for, then I don't think that's true allyship either. That's the one thing you can do is challenge and you don't have to be disrespectful or harmful, but I think to let all behavior around you
Right.
go unchecked and
Right.
you call yourself you're not an ally if you're comfortable doing that. But that also relates to the discomfort of being an ally. It's difficult and uncomfortable to check our friends when they get out of line on
Right there.
things. Yeah,
Right
it's
there.
uncomfortable. So I think that's another big problem is just people having the unwillingness, even sometimes unintentionally, to just experience the discomfort that allyship requires.
In your work, have you found ways to help folks find comfort in the discomfort or at least be less uncomfortable in the discomfort? Because I completely agree that is key.
I don't know that there's a way to be less uncomfortable because you don't know what a situation will bring. But I think people having an awareness that that discomfort is necessary, required, and a good thing, I think that's the main thing. It's just educating people that that's supposed to be a part of it. We're talking about issues that really change people's lives and relate to the very systems that we function in every day. So, just having an awareness of that discomfort and just asking them to be open to it, that's the best that I can do. I think something you do well that I'd love for you to say something about is some of your work involving museums and anti-racism from that standpoint. I think you have a way of diffusing some of the discomfort through art. I think that can be effective. That if we can talk about things where it's not personal, or we can talk about things and from just different vantage points. So why don't you say a little bit about that and kind of finding these places of commonality through artwork, and I think that's one way. That's just not what I'm good at, but I think you're better at starting those conversations around things that aren't as confrontational, so to speak, or can be.
I think one of the access points to getting comfortable with discomfort is finding places, instances, opportunities where the discomfort and the disagreement isn't as deep,
Mm,
right? It's something that it's okay to be in disagreement about this. Like, we don't
mhm,
find this volatile to disagree about this thing. And it then allows for, okay, if we were cool and didn't kill each other disagreeing about X, maybe we can be cool and disagree with each other and talk through why. So
mhm.
I'm always looking for different access points to comfortably disagree, civilly disagree, safely disagree. And one of those is what you were talking about, which my co-researcher Nicole Crawford and I call the Stealing Culture Project. It's about looking at how art and artifacts and collections have been taken from some cultures and placed in other cultures and used to define some cultures in the eyes of the other cultures. One of the things it allows us to do is to take large groups, usually diverse groups that are interested in trying to figure out how to start the dialogues and using art in front of them to break into small groups and talk about their perspectives.
So it's less that I give advice to make people comfortable, because I want them to be uncomfortable, but I do try to use examples and anecdotes that are less confrontational, as you said. So I guess I do it a little bit. So, for example, our vignette in our article is about mental health. It's not about race, it's not about gender. There may be
Right,
something gendered in
right,
it, right? But
right,
it's an easier access point because people can generally sympathize and don't necessarily tense up when it comes to an issue of mental health like they do with race. And so
right.
I do think I am intentional about the kind of examples and problems that I put in front of people just because, we know that there are things that can interfere with learning.
Right.
That if you bring up the charged thing that people have strong feelings on, that may block their opportunity to learn. But I don't think you can coddle folks either, because at some point we gotta relay that benign, easy access point example to the things that are more
Right.
controversial. And so I'm not a fan of avoiding
Right.
those things in best, so back to good, better, best case scenario is you use the example like you did, and it naturally comes from the people, and so it's less uncomfortable
Yes.
when they come up with the ideas on their own and when
Yes.
they come to these conclusions, or it's someone else that they respect and know that
Yes.
kinda gives them that access point, than just kinda come in with a race example.
Or even
So,
just
I'd
coming
agree.
from you, right? It's
Mhm.
coming from
Yeah.
their own community. The last thing you just talked about goes to the importance of strategy,
Mhm.
right? All the things we just finished talking about are about part of a strategy. You can't just do one act. One act is not a strategy. The idea of strategy is something that folks need to sit down and do before they begin the work, not in the middle of the work. You continue to reanalyze the strategy. But if you've thought through a strategy well ahead of time, then you'll realize you can use that artwork piece event as part of the long-term strategy. We're
Yeah.
coming back next week, or we're coming back in 2 weeks, and we're gonna build on that, right? In education, we talk a lot about scaffolding, and this is scaffolding. It's building those pieces so that as we start to put all of this together, the folks who might have been sitting in more discomfort at the beginning start to feel more comfortable. They start to feel like they can engage. They start to feel like they understand. And a lot of times, I have to believe in my spirit, I have to believe that discomfort is often very connected to a lack of understanding. If you don't understand something, it's really easy to get defensive about it because you feel vulnerable. You might even feel
Mhm.
attacked. And so, to the extent that they start to feel comfortable, knowledgeable, then perhaps that discomfort starts to go away as well.
So, something that we've talked about a lot that has come up in previous episodes is failure to do the pre-work in research. And I think this is generally an issue in DEI work, but we specifically see it with regards to allyship.
I completely agree. The idea of doing the research ahead of time is paramount in any endeavor, right? Whether it's science or whether it's DEI, which is its own science. Don't y'all think it isn't? That you've got to do the research ahead of time in order to engage and act in a way that's most efficient and most beneficial.
And not be a burden, right? Because if I gotta stop and take time to teach you, then that's something else that I'm not doing in that moment.
Right.
No one is supposed to teach you, and it's the privilege that comes with, "I wanna help me help you." Like, so you're talking to an already probably exhausted and
Amen.
overwhelmed community, and you wanna give them the additional job of
Amen.
teaching you just the basics that you need to know? Like, ChatGPT is a two-way conversation, go
Amen.
have it, right?
Right.
So, I think it's important to start with some kind of baseline of the topic or the cause or the group that you're trying to identify with and serve as an ally to before you ask any questions. And the another thing that comes out of that is sometimes in that education, people start pushing back on you, like just innately, because it doesn't comport with their understanding. So the benefit of doing the work yourself first is that whatever you're grappling with, you can do that on your own. And if you have questions, you can think about them and, give some attention to them, and then we can talk about it. But like if we're real time learning and I'm trying to
Right.
educate you, when you start pushing back, you can kick rocks. You can just go because I don't have time to both educate you and then also fight with you on this. So is you can have those conversations by yourself. The other thing I would say about that educational piece is that it's necessary because different communities have different needs. And so one thing I think that happens is if someone is served in a ally in some other capacity that they think they can kind of bring that same
Yeah.
approach into a new area of allyship, and that's not necessarily the case. And so
Right.
Doing that research first is vital because your whole approach may be off
Right.
because it's just a different cause than you've served on before.
Perfect.
There's a big amount of pre-work involved in the self-work that's required, that if you don't take that self-look first, it may end up being performative, paternalistic, savior, complex kind of stuff that we've already talked about. And I think an important question to ask yourself is, why are you in it and for how long?
Mm,
If you don't do just that very basic question with yourself, then you should hesitate. And so it's not just doing the research on the cause, the group, et cetera, that you consider yourself an ally to, but it's also doing the self work that's required to be an effective ally.
I am very happy when folks come to me and say, I've been reading X, Y, and Z, and I wanted to talk to you about this because that means, like you just said, they've been doing the self work, they've been doing the reading, they've been doing the thinking, and now they want to engage. That is completely different than teach me X, Y, and Z. And as you just said, they're asking a person or a community that's already taxed. They're already marginalized. That's the reason we started this whole discussion. So they're already overweighted with a variety of issues, and you want to pile something else on top of that. And once you've done that groundwork, then let's have those discussions because you already will have grappled with it in a way that we can discuss it with value. We can discuss it efficiently. We can discuss it at a depth that we couldn't originally.
And that's so important because you have to understand nuance in
Mhm.
order to get into the work too. So I kind of think of it like this, like, when was the last time you needed help? And when the last time you needed help with something, did a one size approach possibly help you with your problem? Probably not,
Probably
right? And
not.
so you have to be able to bring the literature and the background together to know how you be most effective at helping. And back on the point to understanding self and the self humility it requires, that understanding of your unique self also helps you understand the unique needs of other communities. So if I
Mhm.
appreciate myself as a full cultural being with all this nuance, with all this background, then that helps me understand that I'm coming into a situation of people or a group that has its own unique culture and sense of self and the way the world just works differently for them, right?
Amen. Absolutely. Self work. Preach.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Discourse. You can catch the full conversation that sparked this one on the Diversity Different podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.